Alara stared at the ceiling of her dark room, her golden eyes wide open. The lights were off. The stars outside twinkled beyond her dome-shaped window, and the moons of her planet drifted slowly across the sky. But her mind wouldn't rest. It couldn't. For over 10 years, she hadn't slept, not even for a second. Not because she didn't want to, but because her people forbade it. On the planet Veshtar, warriors were never allowed to sleep. Their leaders believed sleep made the mind weak, slow, and soft. From the age of 13, every Veshtari warrior was given injections to block sleep. Rest is for the dead, they would say. Strength is for the awake. Alara had followed that rule her whole life. She had trained in the dust fields. She had fought in the screaming storms. She had hunted wild beasts with her bare hands. She had survived everything. Everything except silence. Because when it was quiet, when no one was watching and the missions were over, her thoughts became loud. They turned into voices, memories, flashes of things she couldn't understand. Her head would ache. Her vision would blur. Some days, her hands would tremble so hard she couldn't hold a spoon. And still, her people said, "You are strong. This is normal." But deep inside, Alara knew something was wrong. Something was broken. Not in her body, but in her soul. One night, after another long battle drill, Alara sat alone in the control room of a scout ship. She was supposed to be monitoring enemy signals, but her mind drifted. She opened a forbidden channel, an old archive, long buried in the system. It was from a planet called Earth. The audio file was only a few minutes long. It sounded strange at first, soft breathing, slow air moving in and out, and then a gentle snore. Alara blinked. She had never heard a sound like that before. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't violent. It was warm. Her body reacted in a way she didn't understand. Her shoulders loosened. Her heartbeat slowed. For the first time in years, the buzzing in her mind faded. She leaned closer to the speaker. The voice continued, mumbling something in an Earth language. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was peaceful. The snoring continued. It wasn't loud. It wasn't ugly. It was natural, human. And then, her eyes grew heavy. She jerked awake after just a few seconds, gasping for breath. But something had changed. For the first time in 10 years, she had nearly fallen asleep. Alara couldn't explain it. The sound of that man's voice, his breathing, his presence through the recording, it had done something to her that no medicine, no ritual, no training had ever done. It had brought her peace. She listened to the file again, then 10 more times. Each time, she felt her body responding. It was as if some ancient part of her DNA, something her people had tried to suppress, was waking up. A longing, a need. Sleep. But not just sleep. Safe sleep. Sleep where she was not watched, not judged, not punished. And that safety, that warmth, she had felt it only when listening to him. She searched for the origin of the file. The coordinates were buried deep, locked by old interstellar rules. But Alara was smarter than most. She cracked the code. The voice came from a man named Jace, a human. He lived alone on Earth, far from the cities, in a forest full of tall green trees and quiet nights. Alara stared at the image of his small home. It was simple, wooden. Smoke drifted from the chimney. No weapons, no threats. Just peace. Her fingers hovered above the ship's controls. She had missions to complete, orders to follow. Her commander would be furious if she left. But Alara didn't care anymore. She was tired. So very tired. Not in her muscles, not in her bones, but in her soul. And so, without a word to anyone, she set her ship to silent mode and entered the coordinates. Toward Earth, toward the voice, toward the only thing that had made her feel whole in years. As the stars streaked past her window, Alara sat quietly in the pilot's chair. The sound file still played in her ear. The soft snoring, the gentle hum of the man's breath. And for the first time, a tear slid down her cheek, because deep in her heart, she knew the truth. She wasn't searching for a planet. She wasn't even searching for rest. She was searching for him, the human man whose voice had touched her in a way no one ever had. And she didn't even know his name. Not yet. But she would. Soon. The forest was quiet when Alara arrived. Her ship landed far from the human's home, hidden beneath thick branches and covered by a field of camouflage that shimmered like heat waves in the air. She stepped out slowly, her boots crunching softly on leaves and broken twigs. The air smelled different here. Fresh, wild, alive. Earth was nothing like Veshtar. There were no glowing towers, no humming machines, no blaring orders echoing from metal speakers. The trees here stood tall like ancient warriors, silent and patient. A soft wind danced between the branches, carrying the scent of moss and pine. Alara's long silver cloak brushed against her legs as she moved carefully through the undergrowth. Her hair, dark blue like the night sky, was tied back in a simple braid, the way she wore it during missions. But this wasn't a mission. Not exactly. She walked without sound, the way she had been trained. Her golden eyes scanned the path ahead, adjusting quickly to the dim light. She could hear the distant calls of strange creatures, birds, insects, maybe small animals she didn't recognize. But none of that mattered. She wasn't here for nature. She was here for him. She followed the signal she had tracked from space. Her scanner, a small black disc strapped to her wrist, glowed softly as it led her forward. The sound file still played in her head, quietly looping in her earpiece. The same soft snoring. The same voice murmuring things she couldn't understand but longed to. It took her 2 hours to reach the edge of a clearing. There, nestled between the trees, was the human's home. It was even smaller than she expected. A wooden structure, shaped like a box with a pointed roof. Smoke drifted from a pipe on the top. A light flickered gently from the window, casting a warm glow on the grass outside. Alara crouched low and watched. Inside, she saw movement. A man, tall, with short brown hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in days. He wore simple clothes, thick boots, dark pants, and a loose shirt that looked soft with age. He didn't seem dangerous. In fact, he looked tired. He moved around slowly, placing things on a table. A steaming mug, a bowl of something hot. Then he walked over to a couch and sat down with a long sigh, rubbing his face with both hands. Alara's heart beat faster. She pressed a small button on her scanner. Yes, it was him. The same voice. The same breath. Jace. He was the one. She watched as he picked up a book, flipped through it, then set it aside. A dog barked far in the distance, but Jace didn't seem bothered. He just leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and let out a deep breath. Then, he dozed off, and the snoring began. Alara's eyes widened. The sound was exactly the same as the recording. Her body reacted instantly. Her muscles loosened, her shoulders dropped. Her breathing matched his, slowly syncing with the rhythm of his rest. She backed away into the forest, just enough to sit with her back against a tree. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wrap around her like a blanket. Minutes passed. Her hands stopped shaking. The usual ringing in her ears faded. And then, something happened that made her chest tighten with shock. Her body leaned forward without her meaning to. Her head dropped. Her arms went limp. She slept. It was only for 2 minutes, maybe 3. But when she woke up, her heart was pounding. Not from fear. From hope. She had done it. Her body had finally trusted the world enough to shut down, just for a moment. And it had happened because of him. For the next 3 nights, she returned to the same spot, never entering his home, never speaking, just listening from the trees. Each night, she stayed a little longer. Each night, her body let go a little more. On the 4th night, she heard him talking in his sleep. "Still miss you, Dad. I tried, you know. Alara tilted her head. The words were sad, even though she couldn't understand all of them. She knew grief when she heard it. It was the same sound her voice made when she thought of her mother. This man, this human, he wasn't just peaceful. He was hurting too. And somehow, that made her feel closer to him. Like they were both broken in ways their worlds didn't understand. That night, as she sat under the trees, she whispered for the first time, "Thank you, Jace." But her whisper didn't go unnoticed. Jace stirred in his sleep. His eyes opened slowly, blinking into the dark. Alara froze. He sat up, frowning slightly. Then he turned toward the open window and said softly, "Who's there?" Alara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The forest was silent again. Jace stood and walked to the door. He opened it and stepped outside, holding a flashlight. He looked around. He shined the light toward the trees. It didn't reach her, but it came close. Alara's heart pounded. She had been trained to disappear, to vanish without trace. But this time, she didn't. Something in her held still. He was close, closer than ever. And somehow, deep in her soul, she didn't want to hide anymore. Not from him. Jace stood silently at the edge of his porch, the flashlight beam sweeping slowly over the trees. The forest responded with stillness, as if holding its breath with him. Crickets chirped in the distance, and somewhere above, an owl gave a soft hoot. But near him, just beyond the reach of the light, everything was quiet. He knew he hadn't imagined the voice. It had been real. A whisper, soft and careful, spoken with a strange accent. Not threatening, not angry, but sad. "Who's there?" He called again, softer this time. Still nothing. He lowered the flashlight and sighed. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the loneliness was finally getting to him. Ever since his father passed, the days had blurred together. He hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. This old cabin had become his world, and the forest, his silent companion. But deep inside, something told him he wasn't alone anymore. He waited a few more minutes, then stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't lock it. For some reason, he didn't feel afraid. Outside, Alara slowly lowered herself from the tree branch where she had hidden. Her breath came in quiet bursts, her fingers trembling. She had been this close to being seen. And yet, she hadn't run. Not truly. Not the way she was trained to. She had stayed. Something about the way Jace had spoken made her chest feel warm. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't chased. He had only asked, as if he hoped someone might answer. As if he wanted not to be alone. And that feeling, she understood it far too well. The next night, Alara didn't stay in the shadows. She stepped closer, still hidden, still watching, but near enough that she could see the tired lines on Jace's face as he prepared for bed. She noticed the way he always paused by a photo near his table, a small dusty frame with two figures. A younger Jace and an older man with kind eyes. His father, perhaps. Alara had no such photos. Her people didn't keep images. They believed memory made warriors soft. Love was a weakness. Sleep was a crime. But here was a man who seemed to be built from love and memory and sleep. And he was still standing, still strong in his own quiet way. On the sixth night, Jace left the door open. Just a crack. Alara saw it as she approached and froze. Was it an accident, or did he know she was there? She crept forward slowly, 1 foot at a time. Her heart raced. Her breath came fast. She reached the porch and waited. Then, like a shadow, she stepped inside. The cabin smelled of old wood and warm tea. She stood in the doorway, her hands ready to flee at any moment. But Jace didn't move. He was lying on the couch, eyes closed, breathing slow. She took a step forward, then another. A floorboard creaked beneath her, and his eyes opened. Alara froze. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Then Jace sat up slowly, blinking in disbelief. She expected him to shout, to grab something, to panic. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at her, not with fear, but with confusion. And something else. Curiosity. You're real, he said softly. I thought I was going crazy. Alara opened her mouth. Her voice trembled as she spoke in his language, slow and unsure. I heard you. Jace blinked again. Heard me. Your voice. In sleep. It helped me. She didn't know how to explain it better. Jace stood up, carefully, his hands open and empty. He moved slowly, like one might approach a wild animal. You're not from around here, are you? He asked gently. Alara shook her head. Your name? She hesitated. Alara. He smiled slightly. I'm Jace. I guess you already know that. There was a pause. The silence between them was heavy, not with fear, but with wonder. Jace motioned toward the couch. You want to sit? She looked at the soft cushions, unsure. No one had ever invited her to sit before. Not like this. Slowly, Alara moved forward and sat, her back straight, her body tense. Jace sat across from her in a wooden chair. Why me? He asked quietly. Why come all this way? She looked down. Her voice was almost a whisper. I have not slept. For many years. I forgot how. But your voice. She looked up again, her golden eyes meeting his. It made me remember. Jace's eyes softened. He rubbed his jaw, trying to understand. So you came here, just to sleep. Alara nodded. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, I've been told I snore like a bear. Didn't know it could be medicine. She tilted her head, confused by the joke, but smiled a little anyway. Jace stood and walked to the back of the cabin. He returned with a blanket. Here, he said. You can stay. If it helps you, you're welcome. Alara took the blanket slowly, holding it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. She laid down on the couch, unsure at first, but the moment her head touched the cushion and Jace returned to his chair, everything inside her went quiet. The hum in her mind, the one that had tormented her for years, began to fade. Her fingers stopped trembling. Her breathing slowed. And without another word, she drifted into sleep. For 6 hours, Alara slept beside a human she barely knew. And outside, in the shadows of the forest, something stirred. A light blinked red. A sensor activated. Far above the Earth's clouds, a signal was sent back to Veshtar. One of their warriors had slept. And someone was coming for her. Alara woke before sunrise. The soft orange light of early morning slipped through the window, casting long stripes across the floor. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, like a child awakening from a dream they didn't want to end. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then her gaze met the small wooden ceiling. The sound of birds chirping outside filled her ears, and the gentle breathing from the man in the corner reminded her. She was still in the human's cabin. And she had slept. Not for seconds. Not in a stolen moment, but deeply, fully, for 6 hours. Her body felt strange, but not in a bad way. It felt light, like she had dropped a heavy armor she didn't know she was wearing. Her hands didn't tremble. The ache in her head was gone. Alara sat up, quietly folding the blanket Jace had given her. He was still asleep in the chair, his arms crossed, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. A soft snore escaped his lips. Comforting. Familiar. She watched him for a long moment. There was something different about Jace, something she had never seen on her homeworld. He had no armor, no weapons, no rank badges, no scanners. Just old clothes and quiet strength. He looked like a man who had seen pain, but still chose kindness. On Veshtar, such softness was destroyed at birth. She stood and moved silently toward the door, slipping outside into the cool air. The forest welcomed her with the rustling of leaves and the scent of damp earth. She took a deep breath, savoring it. But then, she felt it. The shift in the air. She froze, her warrior senses snapping back into place. There was a vibration, almost too faint to notice, a hum under the ground. Alara dropped to one knee, pressing her fingers against the soil. It was real. A signal pulse. Her people had found her. She stood quickly and scanned the skies. At first, she saw nothing. Then, far above the clouds, a shimmer, a shadow moving fast, invisible to human eyes. But she knew it well. Veshtari cloaking tech. A scout ship. Her time was up. Back in the cabin, Jace stirred. He heard the creak of the door and rubbed his eyes. "Alara," he called. She stepped inside, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "They found me," she said. Jace blinked, still waking up. "Who?" "My people. They sent a search ship." He stood up fast. "Wait, are they dangerous?" Alara hesitated. "To humans. No, not unless you stop them. But to me." She didn't finish the sentence. Jace ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, what do we do? Do we hide?" She shook her head. "They will scan the entire area. They will find me. It's only a matter of time. Then what do they want? To take me back. To punish me. For sleeping." Jace stared at her, trying to wrap his head around it. "Punish you for sleeping." She nodded. "On Veshtar, sleep is forbidden for warriors. It is called the soft death. They believe it weakens the mind." Jace's face twisted with disbelief. "But that's insane." Alara shrugged. "To you, but not to them. If they find me with a human, especially in a place of rest, they will see it as betrayal." He stepped forward. "Then don't go. Stay here. I'll protect you." Her eyes softened. "You cannot fight them, Jace. They are not like Earth's armies. They will not ask questions. They will take me by force if needed." Jace clenched his fists. "Then we have to find a way to stop them." Alara looked at him for a long moment. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever stood between her and danger without being ordered to. She touched his arm gently. "You've already done more than I ever expected. You gave me rest. You gave me peace." He met her gaze. "That's not enough. You deserve more than just one night of peace." Before she could answer, a sharp beeping came from her wrist. She looked down. Her old Veshtari beacon, disabled weeks ago, was now flashing. A forced override. They were calling her. She pressed a button. A small hologram blinked to life above the device, showing a tall figure in black armor, Captain Friend, her former commanding officer. "Alara of Veshtar," the voice crackled coldly. "You have broken the warrior code. You will return immediately or face consequences." Jace stepped beside her, arms crossed. "She's not going anywhere." The hologram scanned his image and paused. Then the captain spoke again. "Human, you are unimportant. Stand aside." Jace didn't move. Alara narrowed her eyes. "I am not property. I choose where I stay. And I choose here." The captain's eyes flickered. "Then you choose exile. You choose war." The hologram vanished. Jace turned to her. "What does that mean?" She looked out the window, where the clouds were beginning to turn red with the coming of the scout ship. "It means," she said softly, "they are coming tonight." Jace looked around the cabin. At the wooden walls, the old tools, the thick books and dusty shelves. It wasn't much, but it was home. And it was hers now, too. Then he nodded. "Then we get ready." As the sun rose higher, Jace began to prepare. He reinforced the doors, checked the old emergency radio, set up light traps and mirrors, anything to confuse the Veshtari scans. Alara helped, teaching him how their tech worked, how they thought. They worked together in silence, but it wasn't fear driving them. It was resolve. That night, as the stars returned and the sky grew dark, they sat beside each other on the cabin floor. Jace lit a small candle between them. "You scared?" he asked. Alara looked at him. "Yes, but I've never felt more alive." And above them, hidden behind the clouds, the Veshtari ship opened its silent wings. They were coming. But this time, Alara would not run. This time, she had something worth protecting. And she would not face it alone. Night fell heavy over the forest, darker than usual. Even the moon seemed to hide, its pale glow covered by thick, creeping clouds. The wind blew in uneasy gusts, as if the trees themselves sensed what was coming. In the cabin, Jace sat near the window, watching, waiting. Alara stood in the center of the room, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. She was dressed in her old armor now, a thin black material that shimmered like liquid stone. She had not worn it in years, but tonight it fit her perfectly, like a second skin. Her long braid hung over one shoulder, and her expression was unreadable. "They'll land nearby," she said quietly. "They won't destroy the area. They want to retrieve me intact." Jace didn't like the sound of that word, retrieve. It made her sound like cargo. He looked at her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Alara turned to him. "No, but it's the only way they'll understand." They had made their choice. No more hiding. No more running. Jace had offered to leave with her, to escape together, off-world, vanish in the stars. But she refused. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the others like her. The ones who were still suffering back on Veshtar. The ones who didn't even know what sleep felt like. She needed to stand. And Jace, he refused to let her stand alone. At midnight, the air changed. A low, humming vibration passed through the cabin walls. The candle flame danced wildly for a moment, then stilled. "They're here," Alara whispered. Jace reached for the small tool he had rigged, a pulse disruptor cobbled together from old tech, batteries, and Alara's scanner. It wouldn't stop them, but maybe it would slow them down. Outside, a bright red beam of light cut through the sky, then vanished. A few seconds later, a ship shimmered into view between the trees. It hovered low, silent, shaped like a winged insect, black and sleek. Then it opened. From its belly, 4 Veshtari enforcers stepped out. Their armor was darker than Alara's, with glowing blue veins pulsing across their chest plates. Their faces were hidden behind smooth masks. Each one carried a staff-like weapon, energy-based, fast, and lethal. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They moved like ghosts, straight toward the cabin. Jace stood beside the door, his hand shaking slightly. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained, but he had made a choice, and he would see it through. The door creaked open before the enforcers could even touch it. Alara stepped out slowly, both hands visible. She made no move to attack. "I surrender only to speak," she said calmly. "You may listen, or you may fight." The leader of the squad stepped forward. His voice was mechanical, filtered through the mask. "You are a warrior. You abandoned your post. You broke the law of wakefulness." "I found truth," Alara replied. "And it lives beyond your law." The enforcer raised his weapon. "You will return now." Jace stepped out behind her. "She's not going anywhere." All 4 turned their weapons on him instantly. Alara moved between him and the beams. "He is under my protection." The leader hesitated. This wasn't in their plan. Veshtari law didn't consider humans worth attention, but the fact that one now stood between them and their target, that was a problem. A long silence followed. Then the enforcer raised one hand, signaling the others to lower their weapons. "You have one chance to obey," he said coldly, "or we will remove the human and take you by force." Alara took a deep breath. Her voice was calm, but firm. "You call us warriors. You say strength is found in never resting. But I have been awake for 10 years, and I nearly lost my mind. I heard a voice, a human voice, and it healed me. Not with machines, not with drugs, but with kindness, with rest. She stepped closer, her hands at her sides. I slept, and I survived. I remembered dreams, and I found peace. If that is weakness, then I no longer wish to be strong by your measure. The enforcers stood still, unsure. This was not a battle they expected. One of them raised his visor, revealing a pair of tired eyes. Not angry, not cruel, but lost. He looked at her and said quietly, "Did it hurt?" "The sleep." Alara's expression softened. "No, it healed." The enforcer looked down, then back at the leader. "Captain Thrend will not accept this." Alara nodded. "Then send this message. I will not return. I choose exile. And if he sends more, they will hear the same." Jace stepped beside her again, silent but strong. The enforcer stared at them both, then turned. He walked back toward the ship. The others followed. No more words were spoken, no threats, no violence. The ship rose into the air, disappeared into the clouds, and was gone. Alara stood still for a long time. Jace didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence around them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Finally, she turned to him. "You didn't have to stand with me," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I couldn't do anything else." She looked up at the stars above. They felt closer now, less cold, less far away. "I think," she said, "this place is my home now." And Jace, without smiling too much, just nodded. "You're welcome to it." That night, as the forest returned to its quiet rhythm, and the stars moved gently across the sky, Alara slept again. Not out of exhaustion, not out of desperation, but because she was finally safe, because she was finally free. The days passed quietly after the enforcers left, but the silence held a different meaning now. It wasn't the kind of silence that weighed heavy with fear or loneliness. It was something gentler, like a soft blanket spread over the forest. Alara moved through Jace's world slowly, like someone walking through a dream she never wanted to wake from. She learned to make tea. She chopped wood beside him, her arms growing used to the human tools. She read books aloud, stumbling through the words at first, but laughing at herself when Jace corrected her. Her voice, once used only for commands and warnings, now wrapped around stories and warmth. And each night she slept. Deeply, safely. Her body, once stiff and always ready to fight, now curled naturally against the cushions of Jace's old couch. Sometimes she slept in the chair beside the fire. Other times, when nightmares tried to return, Jace would simply place a hand on hers, and her fears would melt away like morning mist. But peace never comes without a cost. One evening, as golden light slipped through the tall trees and painted the cabin in soft amber tones, Jace returned from gathering berries near the river. He had built a rhythm now, something close to routine, though it still felt new having someone else in his life. He carried the small basket of fruit inside, whistling to himself, only to stop at the doorway. Alara stood in the center of the room, holding her communicator. The screen blinked red, displaying a message looped from the Veshtari High Council. She didn't speak right away. Jace stepped closer. "What is it?" Her voice was quiet. "They sent a broadcast. To the galaxy. They named me a traitor. My image. My story. It's public now." Jace stared at the screen. He couldn't read the alien text, but the flashing red borders and harsh tones said enough. They were making an example out of her, a warning to anyone who dared follow her path. She turned to him slowly, her eyes not filled with fear, but with something worse. Guilt. "I didn't think they would go this far," she said. "They've painted me as a disease. And you," she hesitated. "They know your name now." Jace set the berries down. "So what? Let them talk. They may come again. And not just to take me. They'll try to erase this place, to burn the idea of rest from history." Jace looked at her long and hard. "Then we make sure the idea doesn't die." Her lips parted slightly, surprised by his certainty. He moved toward his old desk, pulling out a dusty camera, an audio recorder, and a solar-powered transmitter he had tinkered with years ago. They think they can silence you, but the same way they sent a message to the galaxy, we can send one back. Alara blinked. You mean, tell my story? Exactly, he said. Let them hear your voice. Let them see what sleep has done for you, what peace has done, what love. He paused, suddenly unsure of the word, but it hung between them, real and undeniable. Alara lowered her head for a moment. Then she looked up, determination blooming in her chest. Then let's speak. That night, they turned the cabin into a quiet studio. Jace adjusted the old lights and fixed the camera's focus, while Alara sat across from him, her hands resting on her knees. The recording began. My name is Alara of Veshtar, she said. I was born into a world that feared stillness, a world that punished sleep. I was told that rest made me weak, that silence was dangerous, that to pause was to fall behind. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't blink. For years, I believed it. I fought through exhaustion. I chased missions into madness. I forgot what peace felt like. She paused, her gaze steady. Then I heard a human voice, and something in me changed. That voice gave me calm. That calm led me to sleep, and that sleep saved me. She leaned forward slightly. If you are Veshtari, and you are tired, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are only human, as I have become. Jace turned off the camera slowly, the silence afterward stretching between them. Then Alara smiled, not with pride, but with relief. She had spoken her truth. She had planted the seed. Now it was out there, growing. They uploaded the message to multiple channels, routed through old relay beacons, hoping that even one signal would break through the wall of control built by her people. For the next few days, they waited. And then, replies came. 1, then 5, then hundreds. Messages from scattered Veshtari colonies, from warriors who whispered their thanks in code, from pilots who had also begun to dream, from a doctor who secretly tested sleep therapy on her own patients, from a child who had hidden a pillow beneath his training mat. Alara read every message, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from hope. She turned to Jace one morning, her voice choked with quiet joy. It's working. Jace smiled, placing his hand over hers. You started something they can't stop now. But just as hope began to shine its brightest, another signal arrived. A private one. A final one. It was from Captain Thrend. He didn't send soldiers this time. He sent an invitation. Come alone, the message said. Meet me where it all began. No weapons, no humans, just you and your truth, if you dare. Alara stared at the message for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the door, and looked out at the rising sun. I have to go, she said softly. Jace didn't try to stop her. He only asked one question. When you come back, will you stay? She turned to him, her eyes full of the fire that had once made her a warrior, and the peace that had made her human. I won't come back, she said, because I won't leave again. And she stepped outside, into the light, walking toward the place where her story had begun. Not to fight, not to run, but to finish what she started. The sun was just beginning to rise when Alara reached the edge of the great stone field. It was an ancient training ground on Veshtar's forgotten moon, cold, dry, and echoing with silence. Once, she had trained here for days without rest, fighting under the brutal eye of her commanders. She remembered every scar she earned on this ground, every moment she was told not to feel, not to stop, not to sleep. Now, after all these years, she had returned, but not as a warrior. She walked without armor, no helmet, no weapons, only her body, her voice, and the rhythm of breath that came easier now. Sleep had softened her muscles, yes, but it had also sharpened her soul. She was stronger than ever. Across the stone field, Captain Thrend waited. He stood still, tall and cold as always, dressed in the full ceremonial black of the Veshtari elite. Beside him were two enforcers, their weapons at their sides but not raised, a sign of truce for now. As Alara approached, Thrend raised his voice. "You returned." "I never ran," Alara replied, her tone calm. He studied her. "You wear no armor." "I don't need it anymore." The wind blew gently between them, carrying the scent of dry stone and dust. Thrend gestured to the center of the field. "Then speak. You asked for this meeting. Let's hear your truth." Alara stepped forward. Her voice didn't waver. "You trained me to be unbreakable. You taught me to ignore pain, to fight through the madness that grows in a sleepless mind. I did all you asked. I followed every order. But I lost something I didn't even know I had." She looked him in the eye. "Myself." Thrend's expression didn't change. "You think your emotions make you powerful now." "No," she said, "but I think ignoring them made me weak." He stepped closer. "You've caused trouble. Your message is spreading. The council is divided. They consider you a virus, a lie." Alara didn't flinch. "Then let them call me what they want. I lived the lie for long enough." He walked in a slow circle around her, the way a predator sizes up its prey. "You are a trained warrior, and you would throw all that away to lie beside a human in a wooden house." She smiled, the kind of smile that came not from pride, but peace. "I would give it all away again if it meant dreaming one more time." Thrend paused. Something shifted in his posture, a tiny hesitation. "Dreams," he said softly, almost like he was tasting the word for the first time. "You don't remember them, do you?" Alara asked. He didn't respond. "Because you were like me," she continued. "You were taught not to need them. But they're still inside you, buried under commands and codes." "I serve Veshtar." "No," she said gently. "You serve fear, and I used to too. But I found something stronger." He looked away for a moment, his jaw tight. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "I hear sounds at night now. My hands shake when I'm alone. I see faces I don't recognize, faces I think I once knew." Alara stepped toward him, not to threaten, but to connect. "It's the memories fighting to return. It's the part of you that remembers how to be whole." Thrend stared at her, and for a flicker of a second, he looked tired. Not physically, but deep in his soul. He waved the enforcers away. "Leave us." The soldiers hesitated, then obeyed. Alara and Thrend stood alone under the pale sky. He lowered his voice. "Do you believe this? Human life is the answer. I believe stillness can be healing. That rest is not weakness. That peace is a choice, not a flaw. And yes, I believe love matters." He turned from her, walking slowly toward the edge of the field. "The council won't accept it." "Then don't speak to them," she said. "Speak to your people, the ones who whisper in the dark, the ones who shake and dream and think something is wrong with them. Tell them it's not." Thrend was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "What happens if I don't?" Alara's voice was quiet. "They'll listen anyway. They already are." He turned back, and for the first time in her life, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not defeat, not anger, but thought. She left the field without another word, walking slowly back to the transport station. No one stopped her. No one followed. The sky overhead was clear now, the clouds gone, and the stars blinking above in quiet approval. When she returned to Earth, the forest felt even more alive than she remembered. Jace was on the porch, hands dirty from planting something near the cabin. He looked up and grinned the moment he saw her. "Did you win?" he asked. She dropped her small travel pack and walked straight into his arms. "There was no war," she said into his shoulder. Just silence finally being broken. In the days that followed, Alara's message grew stronger. More Veshtari sent word. Some escaped to Earth. Some simply chose to rest where they were, hiding their dreams like sacred jewels. Jace helped them settle, taught them how to live slow, how to breathe deep, how to fall asleep with trust in their hearts. And Alara, now known across many stars, became more than a warrior. She became a symbol, a whisper of rebellion wrapped in warmth, a name that meant healing, a voice that had once only known orders, now speaking peace. And each night, in a small wooden cabin in the heart of an earth forest, she curled up beside the human who had changed everything with nothing more than kindness and space to sleep. And under the stars that once watched her suffer, Alara dreamed. And never again did she dream alone.